Yeah, I'm starting this week to mix things up. Yeah, this week we're going to talk about accessibility. I'm going to try to keep it short because we have a lot of coding to go over. But let's get into some announcements. So there's office hours tomorrow, even though it's a holiday. I will be holding office hours. Hopefully there will be other TAs to help me. I know a lot of people have emailed me since I made the Piazza post about coming to my office hours about check-ins, but they are still available to those who have not signed up yet. Since the check-in is due this Thursday, November 12th, and the full final project is due December 1st, I really suggest you start this early, especially the coding part. It takes a long ass time. Yeah. Your projects can be featured on the Showcase website. Pretty sure we've covered this before. There's the link to submit it, office hours link, and feedback link as usual. And also as usual, homework 9 will be released tonight. Yeah, feedback is really great. We really appreciate it. So yeah, now we're going to actually get into the material. So accessibility refers to the practice of building digital content and applications that can be used by a wide range of people. And when people mention accessibility, normally people think of individuals who have some kind of disability, whether it be visual, motor, auditory, speech, or cognitive disabilities. This link is where I linked where I got this definition from. And it's a really great article that we used to have as the reading response, but I mixed it up. But accessibility really isn't just about people with disabilities. It's just about making sure that it really truly is usable by everybody. And it just happens that people with disabilities are the ones that are overlooked, or like, I guess easier. It's terrible to say it this way, but it's true because of stigma and how like our society is built. Not to get too much into that, but like they're the people who end up being kind of forgotten when there's design, or it can be sometimes more expensive to accommodate for them, even though they should be like equally able to access these things. And it's really terrible, and we should change that. So that's basically what today is about. Just designing accessibly in general. So how can we design for accessibility? So take a look. This is a wheelchair. I'm sure you've seen them. And I know this class isn't about physical design or mechanical design, but this is a really good way to think about it. So you see the pouch on the back of the wheelchair. You see the like tray underneath that are over here. I don't know. You look at a wheelchair, it looks like, I don't know, looks like it should work, right? I feel like people don't really second guess whether or not it's actually good for people who require them. And unfortunately, it's really not. Like the storage that they put on them, like this pouch that's on the back or the pouch that's under it, most people who require a wheelchair can't actually reach those things. And it makes them dependent on having somebody to be there with them. And that's not, like, they still value their own independence and freedom, or they're just able to do most things on their own. But if we keep designing things badly, it makes it harder for them to have that independence and freedom that we all have. And additionally, the chairs are also like really terrible, because if you think about it, they might not require the same kind of chairs that we need. In a lot of cases, wheelchairs actually exacerbate the side effects or just pain in their disabilities, and it's just really unfortunate, and it's a really good way to start thinking about how everyday items or things that we normally take for granted aren't actually designed effectively or properly, or with the user's best intentions in mind. Or maybe they're just not like thinking out of the box enough. I don't know who designed the wheelchair. I don't know who designed these. I don't want to make any claims for them, but like, the reason I know about all this is because I'll talk more about it later maybe, but I try to actively immerse myself in talking to people who have disabilities and talking to people who suffer with this, and did like a whole 6-month program working with people who required wheelchairs and caretaking for them, just to understand the caretakers and people with disabilities. And that really helped me as a designer and kind of changed the way that I looked at accessibility. So yeah, probably spent way too long on that. But a quick thought experiment. I'm not going to have you talk about this out loud or anything, but just, think about it in your head, maybe throughout this lecture and after a lecture. But imagine the power goes out. You don't have your phone or any form of light in your house. What things in your house would be the hardest to use without light? And like, what things would it be really difficult to do without light? And then after you think about that for a little bit, imagine instead that there's like a divider that you can't see through that goes between you and your phone or computer. So basically, like, you can stick your hands through and your device is on the other side, but you can't see it there. What would be hardest to interact with and do on your devices then? And I think those are just great mind experiments to think about when designing as well. Like, in kind of similar scenarios as this, it's not going to be perfect understanding of what their experience is like, but it starts to help you empathize with what works and what doesn't work when designing accessibly for people with visual impairment. And it works kind of for physical impairment if you change some of the parameters. But if you start creating these mind experiments and kind of maybe even simulating it for yourself in a safe environment, like, I think you'll start to realize just how useless things are in a lot of ways, and how there are so many assumptions made about who's going to be using what thing, and how many people feel excluded by these designs. So the whole thing about designing accessibly is stepping out of your own experience. Like, you have your own unique experience, but if you're not, I don't know, like, no matter what your experience is, you're not going to be able to understand everybody else's experience, or like other people's experiences perfectly, because that's totally subjective. But like, if you step outside of your own experience, you might be able to empathize with them better, and exploring that will help you design better for people who are different from yourself and understand really what the problem entails. So how do we incorporate this in web design? Because that's actually what this class is about. So y'all probably play Among Us. I know I do. And in their recent patch, they changed the wires from just being differentiated by color to differentiated by color and symbol. And this is something you should do. They also have amazing contrast to try to help with color blindness, but not enough, because you need to distinguish more than just color. So people with visual impairment can still enjoy the games and things that we play, and also like understand that the things are differentiated, and that's why they have symbols in addition to colors. And that's something you should do if you have like graphs and, I don't know, just stuff in general on your site. It really helps. Here's another visual impairment thing, like I talked about contrast in the color lecture and on the previous slide. Here are some screens from Dribbble, because Dribbble is still personal, like personal people's creations. So something you shouldn't do, we didn't dock points for it or anything if you did it on the midterm project, but using, like, this is actually not that bad. Luckily, people weren't doing the most egregious thing, which is instead of including this label up top, they only put the label, they only put the label inside the box that people are supposed to enter in, but normally the contrast is way too low. And even though it's minimalistic and it can look nice, like, people aren't going to be able to see that with visual impairment, and they're not going to know what any of the boxes are actually supposed to be for. Like, maybe by now that they can guess, but depending on what your site is, they might get it wrong, and that can be really difficult, and we don't want that to happen. So, like, make sure there's contrast, you differentiate, you keep labels outside of form boxes. Also do alt text. I have an example here with this meme. So basically, after you, in your HTML for an image, you can use this alt within the, I don't know what these things are called, but after the src of like the title of your file, you can basically describe what's in the photo for people who can't see the photo. And this is incredibly simple, takes like 30 seconds, but it's kind of surprising that a lot of companies and a lot of sites don't have this, and then people with visual impairment can't view your site. So we've been talking about visual impairment a lot, but for physical or motor impairment, making sure that your site can be navigated through the keyboard, so specifically like Enter, Tab, the arrow keys, especially if you use the nav and main tags in HTML, that helps. Like, now this for the nav bar, they're built into HTML5. They'll really help with people being able to use tab so that they can easily navigate through things. This is because it's super hard to like do tons of typing if you maybe don't have that good of control in your fingers or limbs. Personally, I don't talk about this very often, but technically I do have motor impairment, since I have a super serious skin problem that flares up occasionally, and then I can't type properly. And people don't do this enough, and it's super important, and that's why I put it in here. Yeah, I'll talk about that more later. Navigation, navigation, and navigation. Super important to put it everywhere. Super important to make it clear. Again, with the tab, to like go through the nav bar and use the nav tag and HTML. Super important because when people with visual impairment or physical impairment have the, forget what it's called, line reader is what I'm going to call it because I forgot. This basically reads all the content on the site. If navigation doesn't get read, they literally don't know how to get back because they can't see it, can't navigate back. And that's just in general something that's super important in all sites. So remember to do that. That was a problem in midterm projects, which is why I'm bringing it up. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, designing inclusively isn't just about disability. You also want it to be about backgrounds and about just anything you can think of, sexuality, gender, like, I don't know, economic class, social class. You want everyone to feel welcome and be able to use the thing that you design. Technically, like, if they were suddenly handed it for free, they should be able to navigate through it and use it intuitively. I forgot the F in from. please ignore that. But basically, you can see in this side that this is a brief question about which best describes your ethnic group. And sadly, this is from the UK government. And like, if your race isn't listed on here, especially from your own government, like, you automatically feel unwelcome from that place. So just making sure that you include all people as best as you can is super important. Like, you want to make sure that you're not making any assumptions about who's going to be using it, and you want to make sure that you aren't turning people away who could really value from using your product, or like, if that's not what you care about, you know, you can make more money. I'm just saying, it's fine if that's not if that's your value instead. But yeah, in general, you could be thinking about who aren't we considering, who might we be excluding. And when you design this is important because not only does it open up potential users, but also it makes sure that it's well designed and makes it easier to use for everybody. How easy is it for anyone to use our product? So if I can't type, can I still use your product? Like, maybe if I press one button, will I be able to navigate through it? Will I be able to find what I need? Things like that. And here, I know I'm going a little bit over time, but some suggestions to design inclusively. The first thing, and probably the most important thing, is to explore and just try to become familiar, or at least expose yourself to things that are like totally different from what you grew up with. For example, I mean, I didn't know anything about India or Indian history because it was just skipped in my high school history classes and middle school. So first thing when I got to college was take an operative Indian history class, and now I know like tons of stuff about it. But also I did that one program to like work with people who required assistance for their physical impairments. And also just traveling, even though I know that's not what you should do right now, you can still do that through the internet. And just learning about random shit, honestly, is how you design well. And just reading stuff about what other people are talking about. So whether that's through reviews, talking to people, which, you know, I know that's hard, man. I got social anxiety as well. But like, if you just reach out to people, most of the time they're down to talk. If not, it's also a learning experience on how people can be assholes. And you can design so that, you know, they can use your product too and maybe get better themselves. Yeah, do things that scare you and are uncomfortable. Not, obviously not to an unhealthy degree, but that also just really helps. Yeah, don't be intimidated by stuff. It's really, it makes you more closed-minded in terms of design. And yeah, I don't know, if you want more specific advice, reach out. Oh, another super important thing is that I know we've talked a lot about process and rules and like, here's what not to do, here's what to do instead. Like, just because things are like, in terms of rules and processes, and like, people are all doing it in certain ways that work well or don't work well, or it's trendy or not trendy, like, fuck all of that. Just remember to stay creative and stay empathetic. And that's really the whole thing with design. And just being more informed is what I'm trying to do. And yeah, here's some cool resources. The link I put at the beginning also has even more. These are also on that link, I think. But Color Oracle, you can simulate color blindness on Windows. On Contrast, that's a Mac OS app. You can check color contrast for like any color. Pretty great. Then the Axe Chrome extension is also really cool, which I sometimes just do for fun. Is basically you can test any site for accessibility violations on Chrome. And that's super great too. I know there's tons of handbooks out there about accessibility, and a lot of people who talk about it on Twitter and social media, and that makes our job as designers so much easier. Yeah. Questions before we switch to programming? There's stuff in chat. That is true. Also, Dixie said it also looks like in one of those forms where you can't pick multiple. That's also bad with race. Being a mixed person, that's super irritating. Like most of the time I get put down as white, but I'm like, that's only half of me. It's not great, but it gives me privilege, I guess, but I wouldn't have it that way. And it puts me in kind of a weird position, as you can imagine, I guess. Are there any more questions or comments? Doesn't look like it. Just a reminder, my office hours are open tomorrow for check-ins if you need it for the final project.
Cool. All right, I'm just gonna go straight into programming because there's a lot to cover. And I mean, if we go over time, we go over time. Or I mean, no, if we end early, I don't think it'll go over time. If we end early, we'll end earlier. So yeah. Cool. So today for programming wise, we'll be talking about event handlers and conditionals. So again, there's a little bit hefty topic today, but I'm assuming you guys have the knowledge from last week to understand this week's stuff. Here's a little couple funny pictures that you might be able to relate to. Here's a tweet from someone tweeted at 11:58 or 11:56 a.m. Can someone who knows JavaScript please help me? I'm desperate. I know I've been in this situation, not just for JavaScript, but a lot of coding classes I've been in. Yeah, coding ain't just that great sometimes. So you probably come across some frustrating moments already through homeworks or labs, and that's normal. But just know you're not the only one. So wait, really? That's Asia's Twitter post? Oh, I'll say that would have been funny. Yeah, the other picture is from a Reddit post. I think it's Reddit or some forum from this Tech Insider video where their caption was literally, they use coding and algorithms so the drones didn't crash into each other. That's great. You know, look at the code. If going to crash into each other, don't. You know, if coding was that easy, everyone could be coders with just English knowledge. So, you know, like coding is not going to be easy in the first place. And if you think you're already struggling and you want to give up, let's be real here. Like just because I'm a CS major doesn't mean I'm good at coding. Like I've literally come into college with no coding experience. Like I'm really not good. I'm only doing it because I'm Asian, you know, let's be real here. So yeah. So just don't you have us as resources, you have friends as resources, man. I'm sure you have a computer science friend, like we're in Berkeley. So you could ask people, search online, like Google's your best resource. For the most part, 90% of the time, your question is already asked on the internet. So just Google your question and at least something will pop up that will help you. Yeah, so just talking about not making assumptions. Oops. All right, anyways, so I'm sure you've seen the slide a lot. That's through the past couple JavaScript lectures. When the user clicks on something, a button, a link in our image, then we want to change a certain thing in HTML or CSS. And today, with our lecture for event handlers part, we're focusing on the part where when the user clicks, so like the interaction part of the website. How do we know when a user has clicked on something? How do I know when it's hovered or I pressed a key, things like that. So this stuff is a little bit more powerful in JavaScript than the CSS stuff you've already learned. So quick review, I'm gonna ask a couple questions. If we run this line of JavaScript code, what does the variable food return? And you can type in chat, you could unmute yourself, anything. The faster we go, the earlier you get out of class. So yeah. Anyone? What does document.queryElementById food list return? Yeah, so we basically get the food list element. So if you want to be very specific, it's going to be the HTML DOM object called with the ID food list or food-list, you know. That's what food will return because document.getElementById does that. Okay, so what about this one? We changed to querySelector of food list. What does this return for food variable? First element of food list. Yes, exactly. So querySelector again returns the very first, like the very first, for at least for this line, it will return the first object with the ID food list if there are multiple. But all in all, if there's only one, it'll literally return the same thing as the last slide, get element by ID. So just to test you guys, what about food.classList? What does this return? Anybody want to take a shot of what class list? A list of all the classes it has. Yes, exactly. This is, so since we're referencing food and we're using dot notation for food, we're accessing all the classes or like a list of the classes in food list. So it will return a list of classes. What if we add foo to this, or in this code, what does this code run or what does it do? Foo will be added to the class. Yes. So that's exactly what it is. Food or foo, the name foo will be added to the class list of food list, which is the food variable. So that's what we did. We kind of go from left to right, like what I showed last week. When we have the food object, then we access the class list object, and then we add to that object. So yeah, I don't even need to ask this. I'm sure you guys know. It's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, so now for some DOM and event handlers, I'm sure I covered this last week. Basically the DOM document object model. This is what JavaScript creates when we load our page. This is the structure that JavaScript looks at in order to access our HTML elements and knows what to choose or select from, things like that. And you can see that every HTML tag is an object. So like the body is one object, and then within body, because all the tags are nested within body, we have like lines drawn to them shown as like parent-child relationships. H1 is an object, and UL food list is also an object. So, and within each object, we have the specific functions that you could do, its properties that you can access, things that I talked about last week in the object section. And so we taught you document.getElementById or the querySelector, either would work. But basically, when we run this line, we're basically asking JavaScript to look into our DOM and find the element with the ID food list. So traverse. So this is actually the structure. If you want to know, this is called a tree structure. It looks like an upside down tree, but this is how it is in computer science. So we traverse this tree structure until we find an object with food list. And in this case, it will be the UL tag or object, and we return this whole section of the tree and with everything underneath it. So that's what document.getElementById does specifically. Although you really don't need to know that the details, as long as it works, it works. So yeah. The important part to know is that JavaScript is event driven. And by events, we talk about actions that you take as a user. So things like hovering, clicking, typing, all these things that you interact with on a website. It's really easy to overlook these things when being a user from a user standpoint, because you expect these to be implemented already into a website when accessing or surfing the web or whatever, because we're just so used to it. But it's actually a lot to keep in mind, because we actually have to code these things. So for example, there's in JavaScript, they have built-in functions called on mouse over, on click, on key press, things like that. So on mouse over is like hover, on click is just clicking, and on key press is like when you press down on a certain key on the keyboard. And so these are event listeners. And if you go on a pre-existing website, for example, our own web design decal website homepage, and you go to the inspect element part, there is a section called event listeners, and you can see all these different event listeners that currently exist on the website. So you have DOM, content loaded, and load. These two happen on an event that once the page loads, do something. Or before the page loads, do something like that. These might be useful for you guys' final projects, if you want to do like a loading animation, things like that, because it keeps track of oh, if my thing has loaded, then I could move on to the home page, or if it hasn't loaded, then we run this loading animation before. This would be good to look at. Mouse up, that's after you click, you release the mouse, that part. There's ready state change, resize, scroll. Scroll is pretty interesting to note, because you probably visited our website and you scrolled. It's not like a generic website where it just scrolls normally. After you reach a certain point, this middle box will change or animate into a different text box or whatever, or image box. So scroll is important for you guys with final projects who want to implement one full page, but once you hit a certain point on the website, you want to be able to do something on your website. So that would probably be a good point to note down. So these are all the event listeners that you could check on websites that would that exist on their websites. And so with our DOM structure, we can change different elements on our screen. And you're probably thinking wait a sec, I have on mouse over, what's the difference of that with colon hover and CSS, right? Can I just use CSS since we already learned that, and it's easier? I don't want to code it up. But if you really think about it, CSS wise, if you do colon hover, it can only change the styles of itself. So for example, if we're trying to change the LI, one of the list items in our list, and we do colon hover, only that one will change the style if we hover over it. I hover over a button, it's going to change into a different color. That we can use CSS colon hover. But what if I hover or click on LI, one of the list items, and then the H1 tag changed? You can't do that in CSS. It's because CSS has no access to the DOM, because it's only connected to the HTML, and it doesn't do all this coding stuff. So this is why we use JavaScript, because now we are able to have the power to be able to affect other elements when we click on something else. So again, examples like clicking on LI, we modify H1. So how we do that is, one example is on click, and this is built into every single object that in every DOM object there is. Hold on, there's a question. If we have both CSS and JS hovering actions on the same item, would that still work, or would something go wrong? Oh, that's a good question, actually. Well, I think as long as if you're editing different styles of different things, in CSS you do colon hover, that would affect itself, right? But in JS, if you hover, it would affect something else. Then I think both could work. If you change the same things, it all affects itself, including CSS and JavaScript, then that might be an issue. That just depends on which file or CSS or JS file you linked first, or I mean last, to the HTML. So there is some hierarchy there, but you can mix and match and do both. Yeah. So anyways, there is an on-click function, like I said, in every single object there is in the DOM. So this is an example. So here we see, we have this line here. Let me get my pointer. We have this line here. You're pretty familiar with it. We get our button element. Let's say there's a button on our website. It's called pop-up button. And so we get that by get element by ID, and we save that to the variable button element. And then we define a show greeting function. As we've probably used this example in the previous weeks. All it does when show greeting runs, alert howdy. So there's like a pop-up on your screen that shows howdy. And then we have this line here, which is the important part. So we say button, like I said, onClick exists in all objects already. You don't have to define it because it's already there. So that's why we say button element dot onClick equals show greeting this function. So that means every time we run this, every time we click button element, which is this pop-up button object, we run show greeting. And notice the important, really important part of this slide is that show greeting has no parentheses afterwards, even though it's a function call. You probably remember from last homework or this homework this past week, when we call a function, we have to include the parentheses, right? That's how it runs. But in this case, we're not doing that, because if we include it here, what this will do is that it'll run this function show greeting once the JavaScript loads, not when we click on it. So again, if we have the parentheses here, it's going to run when we load the JavaScript, which is basically when we load the page. So when we load the page, it shows howdy, not when we click on a thing. And then once it runs, onClick is technically set to the return value of show greeting, which is there is no return. So onClick is nothing. So onClick doesn't do anything at all, which is why we don't include parentheses. This is like a really confusing thing through all semesters of web design, this decal, because people get confused with this a lot. If you're setting onClick to a function, you're not including the parentheses. Although I will show a variation of this in a couple slides where that is different if you have parameters versus no parameters. So no parameters, no parentheses here for onClick or on mouse over, things like that. So yeah, that's a really important thing that you must note for this. There is also other variations, like I said, on mouse over instead of onClick equals show greetings. There's on key press, onClick, scroll, all these things I mentioned. There's like hundreds out there that you can probably search up online. So they should all have good documentation on it. So these are the most common ones that you'll be using. So this is another way that we can approach this function assignment to onClick. Where we literally assign a function to onClick instead of defining it first and then assigning that variable or that function name to it. So here we have button element onClick equals the direct function. And then within the function, we do alert howdy. It would be the same thing as what we saw here. It's the same exact thing, but we just defined the function before. And we call this type an anonymous function because it doesn't have a name. We can't call it for anything else if we do an onClick for a different element on the page, because it's only unique to that, unless you just rewrite it over and again. And this is pretty useful later on because you will use it when we define a function that takes in multiple parameters. And I'll show you that in like a couple slides. So again, keep in mind, this is anonymous functions, and it's pretty useful. So now let's talk about alternative styling with JavaScript. Oh my goodness. How do I just change CSS from JavaScript? How do I do that? So here, let's see our code. We have our two elements, button element. We have that's basically a button, a box element, and we can imagine it's like a div, a box on the screen. And then we have a function called change color, and here color takes in a parameter color. So here we say box element dot style dot background color equals color. So it's really important to note that in the DOM, every object also has a dot style property, and this returns all the styles that we can access. And in this case, we're doing dot background color. So in style, we change the background color to the color that is passed into this function. So in this case, we assign style dot whatever CSS property, or in this case, dot style dot background color, to a string value because our CSS reads text and strings only. So we use a string value to change the CSS property. So even things like width in CSS is a number value, like 100 pixels or something. All of that should be in a string too. So 100 or quotes 100 pixels, closing quotes. So CSS should always be reading strings, never numbers. I don't know if it's never. I've never come into a case where I've actually used numbers before, so don't quote me on never. But most of the times, it will always use strings. But here, oh yeah, so here we assign an anonymous function to the button element on click. So whenever we click on button element, we run this function, and in this function, we also run change color function. So it's just running functions within functions, which is just running a function. So in change color, we pass in the string value in quotes, red. And then when we run this function, so we assign box element.style.background color equals to red, the string. So now the background color of box element is red. So here's the reason why, like I mentioned before, we use anonymous functions. We can't do change color without the parentheses now because it takes in a parameter. If we assign onClick to just change color without the parentheses, it doesn't know what color we're assigning it to. So it's just going to error out and not work and break your website. So now we have to use an anonymous function. And then within the anonymous function, we run change color with a parameter red or whatever color or hex value you want to input. So this is why there is a difference between a function with no parameters and a function with parameters. So a function with no parameters, you can do what we show you with like button.onClick equals show greeting or change color without the parentheses. But with a parameter or multiple parameters, we have to do anonymous function calls. And then within the anonymous function call, we assign the parameters for that function. So that's important to note too. This is basically because we don't want when we load the page, we don't want it to immediately run like I mentioned before. Because if we did change color red without the anonymous function, it's going to run when we load the page and become instantly red instead of when we click on it. So yeah. So if you have trouble with or not trouble, like if you're wondering how to change a certain style in JavaScript, just literally Google, how do I change whatever CSS property you want with JavaScript? And 99.99999% of the times, someone has asked that question, or there is resources out there that show you how to do it. So we're going to literally ask you if you have questions if you ask us this, like we're going to tell you to Google it, because if you ask us this, we clearly can tell that you didn't even try to Google it in the first place. And there's for sure answers online on the internet. So please try it yourself and Google it first. If not, come to us and ask questions. So now let's take a little tangent. So let's not focus on event handlers anymore. Let's talk about Boolean expressions. And what a Boolean means, it just means true or false. If something is true or false. So let's read this. A conditional statement allows you to do different things based on the truthiness of a condition. So for example, if X is true, then we do Y. So you can imagine if X is not true, then we don't do Y, things like that. So you could, so in CS, if you're a CS major, this is review for you. This is like any operators that you work with. So we can compare different things or variables or things like that with each other with these certain operators. And in this slide, we're talking about equality operator or not equal. So in JavaScript, 3 equal signs together checks for equality. And if you're a CS major, this might look different because in other languages, they're 2 equal signs, not 3. JavaScript equivalent of Python's or Java's 2 equal signs is 3 equal signs, because this expression compares if 2 variables or 2 objects, whatever, are the same type and value. And then this exclamation 2 equal signs means not checked for non-equality. So equals, not equals. And then there's also other relational operators like greater than, less than, or greater than or equals to, less than or equal to, that you can always use. So here's some examples of what we can do. So we have 1 plus 5 triple equals 6. which is true because 1 plus 5 does indeed equal 6. So that evaluates, this whole statement here evaluates into true. We try 1 triple equals 2, which evaluates to false because 1 is not 2. I'm sorry, that's just how math is. But what about 1 plus 5 does not equals 2? This evaluates to true because 1 plus 5 does not equal 2. 6 does not equal 2. So expressions literally can only give you 2 results, true or false. And it's that simple. So if you're a CS major and you're wondering what the double equal signs means in JavaScript, they have that, but it's a little bit more complicated. Just come to our office hours and I'm sure people would answer them. I'd be happy to answer that question. As for logic operators, these are like and, or, and not. If you've taken a math class, you've definitely, or probability class, I don't know about probability, but I'm sure a math class has definitely covered this. But these are like symbols that combine or modify expressions together to create a new expression. So double ampersands is and, 2 vertical bars is or, and an exclamation point means not. And I'll go over every single one. So and, again, double ampersands together. Let's say we have true and false. This would evaluate to false because basically and needs 2 trues on both sides for the whole thing to be true. False and false is also false because there's no trues involved there. But true and true does evaluate to true because, again, both sides of the ampersands have true in it. So if you think of this in English, if X and Y, then the whole thing's true. So like if X and Y are both true, then we put the whole thing as true. Or on the other hand, slightly different. This is the 2 vertical bars. And so what this means that it means that one of the 2 variables on either side should be true for the whole thing to be true. So in this case, we have true or false, which means the whole thing is true because we have at least one true. False and false is false because there's no trues involved at all. And then true and true evaluates to true because, again, we only needed at least one. To have both is good too. That means the whole thing is true. So in English here is if X or Y is true, then the whole thing is true. So, and then not is pretty easy. It's just the opposite of what the expression, the value of the expression is. So not of true is false and not of false is true. Pretty self-explanatory. So I'm going to give you a minute for you to solve this. We can actually combine expressions and nest them together in order to form one whole true or false expression. So I'll give you a minute to actually think about this and solve it. And once you have the answer, put it in the chat or, again, unmute. Damn, y'all so smart. Yeah, y'all should be CS majors too. Yeah, it is indeed true. Let's just break it down step by step. So when you look at it, this whole line, it's kind of daunting. You're like, oh shit, I gotta do math. Like, it's whatever. But let's just take it one side at a time. So we see and holding 2 sides together. And within the 2 sides, there are also more. So let's just look at this left side first. So within the left side of and, we do 1 plus 2. And we check if that's equal to 3, which is true. So this whole left side evaluates to true because 3 equals 3. Now let's do the right side here where we're doing, let's not care about the not first. Let's just do what's inside here. So 5 times 6, we check if it's equal to 31, which is indeed, it's actually false. I actually thought it was 31 for a sec. So now within the parentheses here, it's false. But now since we have a not just does the opposite of that, which means true. So now we have true and true. And because it's an and, both sides have to be true, which results as the whole thing being true. Cool. Just break things down step by step and you'll come to the answer. And then you're like, why did I just do all this useless math? Like, I don't know what the whole point of this is. So there is a thing called conditional statements in programming in every single language out there, including JavaScript. And these are basically if-else cases. If this is true, I do something else, I do something else. So think of it as going hiking and you come across like a fork in the road. You have to make decisions, right? This is what the computer does. This is what your laptop does on so many different occasions throughout, like doing when you're using your laptop. They have to make decisions, and this is how they do it: if, else, and conditional statements, and then also your Boolean expressions that you just learned. If this is true, then we do this. If that is true, we do that. Things like that. So here's the basic syntax of how you do an if statement in JavaScript. We have if, a condition, and that's within parentheses. And a condition is just an expression that, that evaluates the true or false. That's literally what I just went over a couple slides ago. You can literally do like if 1 equals 2, but that's false, so we wouldn't do anything in it. So how it goes, it's like if the condition is true, we do whatever's inside these curly braces. Otherwise, if it's false, we don't do things inside. We just skip this part of the code. So things to keep in mind, the syntax, our conditions have to be wrapped in parentheses. And then to open the if statement is an opening curly bracket, to close it is a closing curly bracket. Same thing with like functions that you learned. So yeah. So let's go through an example. Let's try this if statement here, or this function. We have a variable called x, and we assign it to the number value 5. And then we have a function define number equal number. And then inside we have two if statements. One is if the number is equal 5, we console.log number is equal to 5. And then another if statement is if number is greater than 4, then we console.log number is greater than 4. So let's run through these questions. I'll just walk them through for you. So let's say we run number equals 5. We pass in the number 5 as number. We hit let's check this first case. If number equals 5, which here 5 is number, so 5 equals 5, that means the statement is true. So now we do the stuff inside. So we print out number is equal to 5. And then now we also have to check this next if statement, because that's the next part of the code once we finish this thing. So if number is greater than 4, and again, number is 5, so 5 is also greater than 4, this part is true again, so we print out number is greater than 4. So now after running this one line, number equal 5 function, we printed out both statements. Number is equal to 5 and number is greater than 4. So let's try running number equal, we pass in 4 this time. So now if 4 equals 5, which is false because 4 is not 5, we're not going to do this because clearly number is not equal to 5. So we don't do what's inside the if statement. And then we also check the thing here. If 4 is greater than 4, then, well, 4 is not greater than 4 because it's the same number. So this is also false. So again, we don't do what's in here, this console.log line. So basically this line, it didn't print anything. There's no result because it didn't satisfy any of these conditional or conditions. And then similarly for number equal 3, we also don't print out anything because it's not equal to 3 and it's not greater than 4. So yeah. So here we have an else portion of the code, which is another section, another half of like the if statement syntax. So what this means is like in this equation or this function, we say if number is 5, we print out this. But for any number that is not 5, we go into else case. So like if as long as this condition is false, we'll always go into else case. Otherwise, if number is 5, then we do this. And then we skip the else case because we satisfy one of the two conditions. So let's say we run the same lines again, number equal 5. What would this do? We run the function, go in, number 5 is definitely equal to 5. So we print out this line, number is equal to 5. And then we skip this else case because we satisfied the if condition already. Notice how like previously we had two ifs and we had to check for both of them. Once this ran, we also checked the second one. But the special thing about an if else statement is that this is one whole if statement itself. So if it satisfies one of the conditions in the whole if statement, it will skip everything else. And because we satisfied the first if, we don't do the else. So what about we try number equal 4? Number 4 is not equal to 5, so we don't do the if. We automatically go to the else because we want to satisfy one of the two properties or the two conditions because number is not 5. So here it says we print out number is not equal to 5. And the same thing for a number equals 3. 3 is not 5, so we go into the else case and we print out number is not equal to 5. There's also a special caveat to ifs. If you want multiple conditions in one if statement, you could use the else if check. So that would apply multiple conditions to check in one section or one if statement. And you can have an infinite number of if statements as long as there's a condition to check it with. So let's try running this this number equal 6 now. So when we come into a function, if number 6 is equal to 5, which is false, this part is false, so we don't go into if statement. So we don't print out this thing. Else if number is greater than 4, 6 is greater than 4, which this condition is true, we print out, we're going into the else if now to print out this. So number is greater than 5. And like the last slide, because we satisfied this one thing out of this whole if statement, we skipped everything underneath it. So we skipped this else. So, and if there's other else ifs under this else if, we skip all of those too, because once we satisfy this one, we don't care about the rest. So now this, we printed this one line, and then we just finish the function. So let's try what does number equal 5 do? So 5 equals 5, true. So now we go into the if statement, print out numbers equal to 5. And like I said, we satisfied one, so we don't care about the rest. So we finish, once we print this out, we're done. And then for 4, number equal 4. Number is not 5, so that's false. We don't do this. 4 is not greater than 4, so that's false. So we don't do this either. And so since we satisfy none of these, we automatically go into else case. And then we do console.log number is less than 5. So we print out here, and then we finish there. So these are special syntax of JavaScript that you can do. And this is really important because these are decisions that the computer or the code has to make. If this button has been clicked, or this class list contains this certain class name, then we do something. And I'll show you how to do that with this demo. So you can do this demo and follow along with me, or you can just watch. So in here, we're just gonna do like another dark mode simulation. We love the dark mode theme across websites. I'm sure if you've done lab from last week, then you probably know how to do this. So let's not care about any of these styles, whatever. Let's focus on the JavaScript section. Try to zoom in a little bit. Okay, so we're given some two variables that we should fill out first because they're currently nothing. So let's see, button. I'm going to try to find a button. That's probably this change mode button here. So it says this button here is called ID button. So let's do document.get element by ID. And in a string or quotes, we do button. So now our button is retrieved from JavaScript. And for our list, it probably means, so I see there's this big list div here with the ID list. So I'm gonna spice things up a little bit with query selector. I'm gonna try that. Oops. And then ID list. So now we have our button and our list objects in JavaScript that we can use. So we have a function that we kind of created that we want you to finish called toggle dark mode. And you could probably guess when you click on this button, it should change to dark mode or change back to light mode if it's in dark mode, things like that. So if we see inside here, we have this variable called isDarkMode, and that's a Boolean or like a true or false variable because we see here this list up here. If it has the class, or it checks our class list and then does doc contains dark. And what this doc contains things, it's a built-in function that returns a true or false Boolean value that basically says like check lists, class list. If it contains dark, we output true. If it doesn't, we output false. So here we see div ID list, this object. We don't have the class called dark in here. So you can probably imagine that is dark mode is set to false right now. And then we just print out just for testing purposes. So now we want to switch between the colors, depending on if we're in dark mode or not. So here we need a conditional statement. So the if else statement or if else thing that we wanted that I showed you. So we start with if, and then within the condition is again wrapped with a parentheses. So we do parentheses. We open. So within our condition, this is going to be a true or false value. But think about it, like is dark mode is already a true false value itself. So I literally can do it is dark mode. If is dark mode, because that's true or false. If this is true, if this is false, or in this case, if dark mode is true, we do this. You can also do if it's equals true, of course. That's the same exact thing, but if you want to type a little bit more, if it's equals false, things like that. Anything that will result in a true false value should work. So if it's in dark mode, that means dark mode is on. We want to turn dark mode off. So I know you guys know the toggle function, but I'm just going to do like the definition of what toggle does. So I'm going to be using like add and remove instead of toggle. So that means if it's on, then we want to remove the dark class from the list. So .class list.remove dark. And for the sake of this example, we also apply, currently, technically, this button has dark in it already. So that means it's in dark mode. So when we have when our list is in dark mode, our button is not. So it's always the opposite. So here, and this is just the sake of the example. You don't have to understand what this means. So I'm going to add dark to it because once the list comes out of dark, we want it to have some contrast color. So it looks like it's in dark mode, just the button though. Otherwise, else, if it's false, if this dark mode is not true, then we do everything in the else. That means if dark mode variable is false, that means we're not in dark mode. So we want to turn on dark mode. So that means we basically do the opposite of what's in here. List class list.add dark button.class list.remove dark. Yeah, so this could be our if statement. So if we run it right now, nothing happens. Even if I press run with JS, nothing happens because we haven't set the event handler yet. Clearly I'm clicking on this, but I never in the code set what the on click should be. So here we kind of give you a starter line, but we never set it to anything. So here we want you to change this part to set our function to be called when we click on button. And the easiest way, because toggle dark mode function doesn't take in any parameters, we can do the name itself without the parentheses, dark mode with no parentheses. Why? Because again, we don't want it to run when we load the page. So here I assigned the button on click to this function, and whenever we click on the button, we run this function. So here, what it looks like, boom. Wow, like we're adding dark mode, we don't add dark mode, things like that. And we define the on click to be this. And I'm sure you've seen this in your homework because like the last part of the homework was to add this line. Because without it, your clicking thing, like your toggle, your song list toggle, if you click on that button, nothing would happen. So that's why we literally gave you that line, because we teach it this week instead of last week. So you're probably already familiar with this line. So again, this is how you do it. We could also do this with well, actually, let me show you what happens when we have parentheses instead of no parentheses. So imagine this is our page when we load, right? And it looks fine. But like if I add the parentheses, look, it already ran. It changed into dark mode. It ran the function when I didn't even touch the button. That means when the page loaded, it ran the function. And now when I change the button, there's nothing happens because the return value of toggle dark mode function is nothing. There is no return value for this function. So button.onClick is nothing. Nothing happens. This is why we don't want the parentheses here, because it immediately runs that function, and we don't want that behavior. So that's why we have no parentheses, and it should work like this. We could also do an anonymous function call here. Oh, shoot. It would work the same as what I just showed. Why is it doing that? So here within the anonymous function, we call toggle dark mode, and it's going to work the same as what I just showed. So either or works when we have no parameters, but if we take in a parameter, then we have to change things. We have to use the anonymous function. Are there any questions to this demo? I feel like I'm missing something. And of course, like you guys literally use the .toggle thing for homework and lab. So this, like, I don't ever see the need for you to use this kind of statement when we have toggle, because that does the remove. It does the contains, or literally does this whole thing in one line. So I literally can replace this with list.classList.toggle dark, and the same thing for button. .toggle dark, and it should do the same thing. Yeah, exact same behavior. So toggle within 2 lines, I literally did what I showed you earlier. But the reason why I did this is because I want to show you how to use like if Boolean expressions, and then also if else, things like that. So again, I don't see why you would ever do something like this when there already exists a toggle. Yeah, any questions, guys? I know there's a lot. I think this is the end of the lecture. Yeah. Oh yeah, I skipped the slide, but when I took this class, no one ever taught me about these the DOM and these things like .onclick, .onload, these event handlers, because they taught like jQuery back then, and they spent literally like one or 2 weeks on JavaScript and didn't cover the details of it. And so when I went in for a front end interview and they asked me about JavaScript DOM and like the event handlers, I was like, the fuck? Like I never heard any such thing. And this was an interview. And so let me tell you, if you want a front end career, that's like coding wise, I think web design decal knowledge is not enough, because there's a lot more to it. You really have to know your JavaScript well. So this knowledge is definitely not enough for you. So yeah, so this is why I said this, like, this was a couple semesters ago. I was like, if only this was taught last semester. So I wouldn't have gone through the embarrassing interview ever. So yeah. Cool. Any questions, guys? All right. If that's it, you are free to go. Again, checkoffs are due Thursday before lab, and Asia is having office hours tomorrow. So thank her for having office hours on a holiday, and email her ahead of time. So please get started early on your project, because we did release it earlier than usual.